Internet horror is a constantly expanding and evolving genre, one that is so flexible and full of potential that even those words, internet horror, conjure very different images for different people. Currently, the idea of internet horror tends to be associated with stuff like analog or digital horror movies on YouTube, ARGs and online scavenger hunts, well-told and designed audio narratives and podcasts, and, of course, your favorite horror personalities and content creators, people like Wendigoon, or Nexpo, or Nightmind, or me. But when I was growing up, internet horror, at least to me, meant a lot of different things. Creepypastas, narration videos, trick jump-scare flash games, or rug pull games like Can Your Pet, paranormal footage compilations, dark web fetishization. Those things aren't gone, obviously, but their era of influence is definitely past, and the things that are popular now are being created by people who grew up with exactly what I'm talking about. One of my favorite horror-themed subreddits, and one that you're probably familiar with if you watch stuff like Creepcast, is the NoSleep subreddit. It's a storytelling subreddit that was formed in 2010 with the special guideline that all posted stories had to be treated as though they were true and happening in the real world that we all exist in. What this meant was that there had to be an in-universe way and reason for someone to be posting their story on the subreddit, and there had to be sound logic within the plot and character choices that didn't directly contradict someone's regular general understanding of reality. Commenters were also expected to buy into the story being presented by the posting author, not commenting or critiquing the story itself, but rather giving advice or criticism to the character in the story that typically the author represents. Instead of saying, "I think the logic of the scene is broken, why would your character put himself in this situation?" your comment would be expected to read like, "Why did you put yourself in that situation?" It's a pretty interesting and valuable framework for commenting because the author is allowed to add to their story in their response, correct after posting, reframe their own writing missteps, if they even are missteps, as simply further plot and storytelling, and, in the same action, also begin to include other people as a part of their story. I'm a big fan of D&D, especially the role of the DM. There's something really satisfying about telling a story that is influenced by the thoughts and decisions of other people, and that's exactly what's so cool about something like the NoSleep subreddit. It brings a new personal element into the story that is hard to get anywhere else. Because of this, I'd like to introduce you to one of my favorite horror mediums growing up, a collection of stories that automatically include their audience as a part of the world in a fascinating and creative way. A collection that, over time, has been expanded into a large, weaving world, placed right on top of the one we already exist in, full of familiar and unfamiliar faces, and horrors, the likes of which we have never seen and could hardly conceptualize. Let me introduce you, or reintroduce you, to the SCP Foundation. Howdy, Boneheads! Today, we're taking a look at the SCP format as a whole, not just one specific story. There are plenty of really good ones to choose from, but that's not what I want to focus on today. If you're an SCP superfan and you want to see me get into some of the best or possibly worst stories, let me know in the comments. But before we can even think about that, we have to understand what makes the SCP universe so tantalizing. In the field of conspiracy theory, there's something really exciting about gaining access to classified government documents, at least theoretically. In reality, even if we could find a way to get into the juicy stuff, my expectation is that even an uncensored and valuable document would be densely formatted and safeguarded in a way that makes it hard for an unqualified investigator to come to some dramatic conclusion about it. But the blockbuster version of this, breaking into some top-secret government facility, finding a manila folder with a big red top-secret stamp on it, and opening it to see something like an alien autopsy or time machine blueprints or something, it's a super enticing narrative. I think all of us can agree that our governments, wherever we're from, love hiding things from us, and those of us who value a good crackpot theory or X-Files story would love to believe that it's something so dramatic as alien life or futuristic technology over boring stuff like embezzlement or whatever. And that's what makes the SCP universe so fun. Every entry is formatted in a way that feels like you've discovered something that you were never meant to see, and the interesting thing is, the way this is done is by using censorship. The very first SCP story ever written was about SCP-173, a dirty concrete statue that can move at incredible speeds when not being actively observed, who kills its victims at impossible speeds by breaking their necks. The short fiction was published in 2008, and it's not the entity itself that made the concept so popular, as it was essentially a play on the Weeping Angels from the Doctor Who episode Blink, which was released the previous year. The thing that made the story so fascinating and unexpectedly chilling to readers, despite its shortness, was the way it was written. SCP stories, in case you haven't read them, tend to be less of a narrative and more of an explanation of something strange, in the most clinical and scientific voice possible. They're often formatted as reports and prioritize explaining captivity steps before explaining what the actual entity is. This helps feed the idea of an agency that has strict priorities. The most important part of being in the SCP Foundation is always going to be keeping an SCP contained rather than knowing what it is. And in fact, in plenty of cases, knowing what it is a lot more dangerous than simply focusing on its containment, hence a document layout that places critical importance on procedure and only gives additional information later, and with many obscure details. Not only is this formatting additive to the universe itself, by clearly being written for someone in-universe rather than a known audience, but additionally, it also serves to make your reading experience more interesting. It's exciting how you start to get an idea for the danger level of an SCP from reading its containment procedures before you even know what's being contained. If I tell you that an SCP is always to be kept in a thick steel box, buried deep underground, surrounded by heavily armed guards, you already know whatever's in that room is trouble, and I haven't even started describing what it is or what it does. After the publication of SCP-173, many readers latched onto this format and began compiling their works together under one fictional foundation, the SCP Foundation, and thus, a horror phenomenon was born. Consuming SCP content is a lot like consuming lore videos or texts, except there's not a pre-existing narrative that we're familiar with, at least not right away. Many elements and characters in the SCP universe touch in one way or another, and as you become more invested in the world and the procedures, you start to make connections and form your own kind of story in your head. Some SCP documents include text that is more narratively formatted than typical, but those tend to be for the biggest and most popular characters and stories, stuff like SCP-096 or SCP-3000. I talked on this channel a few times before about how valuable using one's imagination can be for horror, using a theory I called Schrodinger's Corner, which should maybe be retitled McGrath's Corner, because Schrödinger certainly didn't come up with it. Basically, the idea was that saying, the scariest thing in the world is behind this corner, is more effective if you just linger on the corner rather than turning it to show your audience something that is subjectively scary. It is valuable, at times, to restrict what your audience is sure of, cultivating an atmosphere of dread or tension, because room to imagine is what creates memorable experiences. SCP stories do this super well, by using, as mentioned earlier, censorship. A glance at any piece of SCP media is enough for it to be immediately recognizable, as each block of text is filled with black bars hiding names, places, procedures, or anything else that could be critical for completing the full picture of what you're witnessing. Of course, as is the case in any community with a large and varied group of writers, some stories can abuse this concept, censoring almost anything and everything until the story is near incomprehensible. There's a happy medium you have to find, giving enough context for your censorship to make sense, but hiding enough that your story is still tantalizing to the reader. In fact, the mistake of over-censorship appears so much in SCP submissions that there's even an in-universe SCP to explain this habit. SCP-1059, a memetic SCP that allegedly causes supernatural compulsions in its victims to hide information that would otherwise be irrelevant. The SCP convinces them that much more of the information they hold is more valuable or dangerous than it would appear to an uninfected individual, and they feel the need to hide it from people. Maybe now we should talk about what an SCP actually is. SCP stands for Secure, Contain, and Protect, which is the motto of the SCP Foundation, a fictional, secret worldwide organization devoted to recording and protecting the population from strange, unexplainable creatures and phenomenon. What are they securing, containing, and protecting? Well, not to confuse you, but SCPs. That's the name given to individual entities that the Foundation is focused on documenting. There are other words that are sometimes used like entity or event or frequently anomaly. However, each SCP is organized by those three letters and then a number indicator, of which there are now around 8,000 entries. The SCP universe is contributed to by hundreds of different authors with varying degrees of experience. You might think this is a complicating factor to the cohesion of the overall narrative throughout this universe, and sometimes it is, but in fact, a lot of what makes the universe of SCP so compelling is how ideas, events, and characters are shared across stories and entries from different creators. As SCP has evolved, it has continued to follow the general clinical formatting that makes it so iconic, but has found ways to introduce more traditional writing and storytelling into the mix. Sometimes, an SCP file will include testimony from a researcher or discoverer that tends to read a lot more like a regular horror story than a government form. It's pretty clever, allowing writers to introduce a relatable human element to their idea, as well as expand on the function of their SCP through example. Over time, certain characters, groups, and SCPs have expanded past their original stories and been claimed by the greater SCP writers fandom as a staple of the universe. such as the enigmatic O5 Council, MTF units, D-Class, individual characters like Dr. Clef or Dr. Bright, and even some SCPs, usually ones that have some value to the Foundation, like SCP-3000 for instance, who is often used in the creation of amnestics. This shared universe, to a lot of readers, is one of the most exciting parts of the SCP fandom. It can be kind of overwhelming getting into the community at first, with a truly intimidating number of regular entries, not to mention all the other documents and supplemental materials that have appeared since the series' creation, but once you get over that hump and start to familiarize yourself with some of the most popular and commented on parts of the fandom, you'll start to recognize little things, starting with stuff like simple classifications like Euclid, Keter, and Thaumiel, which indicate the difficulty of keeping an SCP contained, and expanding from that to recognize characters, procedures, locations, and simply general themes that have become inseparable from the world of SCP. Over time, especially if you're reading the articles themselves rather than having them explained by someone like the Volgun, who is great if you struggle with reading dense stuff like this, you begin to feel like an expert, even if, realistically, you've barely scratched the surface of what the universe has to offer. And that really is the best part of SCP, as a writer and as a reader. The way it expands upon itself, the way you can jump in just about anywhere and start building an understanding in your own mind of the world. SCP makes you a part of the story by 1. Telling you all the time that you're not supposed to be reading what you are, therefore making your very consumption of the narrative an active intrusion, making you an actual character in the universe, even semi-passively, and 2. By staying consistent enough to give you the opportunity to start forming ideas and theories on your own. There are a ton of popular SCPs, and also a ton of barely known SCPs. If you like this short little starting explanation of the universe and want to see me go into specific SCP stories or characters, let me know in the comments and tell me which ones you want to see. I know this was a shorter video than I normally make, and hopefully that doesn't bother anyone. I was busy this last week with stuff like Thanksgiving and my anniversary, so my schedule got a little interrupted, but I still wanted to put something out, especially to celebrate 50,000 subscribers. I might start experimenting with shorter videos or breaking my larger videos up into parts more often. It'll be the same amount of content, just appearing with more regularity. Anyway, thanks for joining me on this little explanation of one of my favorite large-scale writing projects. I hope you enjoyed it, and thank you all so much for 50,000 subscribers. I'll see you in the next one, boneheads.